presentation today is attended by Deputy Minister Yu, Dr. Fatih Birol, the IEA Executive Director, and Ms. Dagmar Gracek, the Senior Energy Policy Analyst at the IEA. We will be hearing from all participants and including the main findings of the IDR. Following the presentation, we will have an opportunity for a Q&A session. We will take a short break to accommodate the questions. I would ask our colleagues from the press to please use the Q&A box in the Zoom application. With that, I would like to turn the floor to Dr. Fatih Birol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murat, and greetings to you, Mr. Deputy Minister, to all the colleagues in Korea and the viewers following this event across the world. We are going to release our report on Korean energy situation. International Energy Agency reviews its member countries' energy policies and makes recommendations to governments how we can have a better energy market in those countries every 5 years. And we are looking at different aspects ranging from energy security to climate change, from climate change to transformation of energy systems. And when I look at the Korean in-depth review, the policy review, I can tell you that Korea has a lot of good practices, lessons to share with the rest of the world. So I would very much encourage the Korean government to share its experiences from different type of policies in the energy sector, from technologies to efficiency, from efficiency to pricing practices with others. And my humble suggestion is please make as much as documents available in English, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of interest to understand the policies you put in place and the experiences from those. We are, when we make our review of the policies, we invite several experts from different countries. It's an independent review. And in the case of Korea, there were 12 examiners from Australia, Norway, Slovak Republic, Switzerland, Turkey, UK, and European Commission. And of course, IEA Secretariat was also part of the team. Now, I wanted to also thank the Mr. Deputy Minister, your government, your ministry, to help and facilitate the job of the examiners, reviewers, as well as the Korean Energy Economics Institute. My colleagues had discussions throughout the year with different ministries in Korea, regulators, energy companies, system operators, consumer groups, academia, NGOs, with all of them. And we came up with the recommendations we are going to share with you in a minute. Now, Korea is an important player in the global energy markets in Asia and elsewhere, but all the countries around the world are affected from what is happening in the global energy markets through different channels, oil markets, technologies, prices, and others. And it is the reason I thought I will give you first a brief outlook about the global energy system, and then we will focus on Korea, country no country is an energy island. We all are affected from what is happening in the world. I would like to start with the coronavirus and its impact on our energy world. With coronavirus and its impact on the economy, I can easily tell you that the global energy sector is experiencing a shock that it never had since Second World War. Big shock on the global energy sector and every part of the energy sector. If I can give you a couple of numbers to show you how serious this shock is, the dimensions of this shock. For example, global energy use this year will decline about 5%. It's a huge decline, but to understand how deep this decline is, I can bring you to the financial crisis we had, 2008, 2009 financial crisis. I am sure we all remember. And after the financial crisis, global energy use also declined, but this year's decline is 7 times deeper than the decline we had after the financial crisis. Just to show you how big the dimensions of the shock we are experiencing in energy world. Oil markets, big drop in terms of oil use. We expect the oil demand this year will decline about 10%. Coal is in a big decline, and we expect coal is already in its terminal decline in terms of its use. But still, the largest contributor to global electricity markets, mainly in Asia. Gas also declining about 3% this year, the biggest decline that the gas industry ever had since its birth. The only increase is coming from renewables, solar and wind, modest but still an increase, unlike the other fuels. And this tells me that the renewables are immune to COVID and COVID's effects. And finally, investments. Global energy investments this year, they are declining about 18%. Oil, refineries, gas, coal, power plants, renewables, nuclear, everything, investments are declining close to 20% this year as well. All of this decline brings us to emissions, and we expect this year global emissions will decline about 7% CO2 emissions, which normally should be a good news decline of emissions. But in my view, it is not a reason to be happy, be happy about, because this decline is not happening because of the right energy policies, new technologies. It's happening because of the economic downturn and because of the pandemic, not for the right reasons. And for me, low economic growth is not a wise, low emission reduction strategy. We need both economic growth and the decline of emissions. So this is the picture where we are. And of course, when we look at the future, we know that the many countries around the world are focusing on the clean energy transitions, and IEA is leading global clean energy transitions, and therefore we look how the world looks like in the next 2 decades in terms of the emissions. Now, with the current policies in place, if the governments do not change their policies, the enacted policies means emissions will be more or less the same, and the global temperature will decline about slightly, emissions will decline slightly, but the global temperature will be about 3 degrees Celsius increase. So 3 degrees Celsius increase in the temperature means catastrophic implications for our planet. We all know that the scientists tell us that the temperature increase should be maximum 2 degrees, but better if it is below, well below 2 degrees. So therefore, we look and we see that in order to bring the emissions to zero by 2070 or 2050, lots of efforts are needed. Many countries are today talking about, including Korea, and I am really thankful to the Korean government for that, the 2050 net zero targets. But, ladies and gentlemen, if we take into account of all the countries, including Korea, they said they will bring the 2050 emissions to net zero. It is only about 15% of the way that we want to go. EU, Korea, New Zealand, Canada, Japan, all of them together 15%. We all know that China has a very important statement, President Xi Jinping in United Nations. Only 2 days ago, I had a meeting with the Chinese Environment and Climate Minister himself, the minister, and I see that China is going to take this target seriously, and we are all looking forward to hear what are the elements of those in the next 5 years plan of China. Having said that, even China, together with the others, make a small portion, not the majority of the emission reductions are needed. There is still a very big gap. And if we see the emissions in 2050 decline, the gap is even much more pronounced. So therefore, we look to reach net zero 2050. What do we have to do globally? It is, of course, it requires a lot of political courage and determination, like Korean government, to come up with 2050 net zero, but it requires huge amount of work, especially in the next 10 years. And this work has to come from different stakeholders, companies, energy companies, for example. They have to be part of the solution. Many areas we expect companies will need to push stronger, from digitalization to deployment of solar, eliminate the flaring, offshore wind, and just to give you an example, the order of magnitude of the challenge, hydrogen use to reach the net zero in 2050, hydrogen use need to increase by a factor of 100 in 10 years of time. I know that the Korean government has a very strong hydrogen target, and we hope to see the world, like Korea, moves in the right direction, and not only putting the targets, but investments and the necessary measures to reach those targets. Just to give you an example, the order of magnitude of the challenge. Citizens, they also have to be part of the solution, not only companies. For example, we need to use less private cars. We suggested if it is less than 3 kilometers, either bicycle or walking, or making more use of public transportation, or using cars with no emissions, such as electric cars. Today in the world, 2.5 million cars sold today are electric cars. To reach our target of net zero, this needs to go to 50 million cars sales in 2030. So from 2.5 million to 50 million. In other words, in 2030, according to our calculations, every second car sold should be an electric car. Every second car should be electric car, a task for the citizens. And of course, finance world, they also need to be an important driver of reaching net zero, putting the investments on the efficiency, innovation, and try to come up with the financial tools to mobilize private capital. Just again to show you how challenging to reach the net zero is and what needs to be done. In terms of clean electricity investments today in the world, we have about 380 billion this year invested clean electricity. In 2030, this needs to increase by a factor of 4, 1.6 trillion, factor of 4. And again, to put it in a context, this year, the investment in the entire energy, electricity, oil, gas, coal, everything put together is 1.6 trillion today. And 2030, only for the clean electricity, it should be 1.6 trillion. So huge also challenge financially. So we need companies to be part of the solution. Citizens need to be part of the solution, and finance sector need to be part of the solution. But who is in the driving seat? Who is in the driving seat? It is the governments. Governments are sitting in the driving seat. The destiny of our clean energy transitions effort lies in the hands of the governments around the world. It is the reason IEA is an organization of the governments. IEA family countries represent about 80% of global energy use. It is the reason we are working with all of our governments, including with Korea, to support their efforts for clean energy transitions. So these are some thoughts about the global energy market, where we are today, especially in the context of coronavirus, and what are the challenges to reach our climate and energy goals. And of course, now we want to come to Korea. What are our findings about Korean energy sector, and what are our recommendations? And I am going to ask my colleague, our senior energy policy advisor, Mrs. Dagmar Grečik, to tell us about our findings on Korea.
Thank you very much, Dr. Birol, for giving me the floor. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I will just briefly introduce a little bit the key situation in Korea. The energy mix in Korea is still dominated by fossil fuels, which account for 85%, and 84% of all the energy in Korea has to be imported. The industry sector is a very important energy consumer, but also a sector that is very challenging to decarbonize. So that presents a challenging point for Korea to start off with. Nevertheless, Korea set itself strong ambitions to change this situation. Over the summer, the Green New Deal was launched to address the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And just a month ago, the president of Korea set a very strong mark on the horizon for the country to be carbon neutral by 2050. Korea is to be applauded for these strong ambitions, and we hope that this review, with its recommendation, will contribute to Korea achieving its targets. The first ambition I want to highlight relates to the CO2 emissions. Korea has seen a strong growth in CO2 emissions over the past decade due to its very strong economic growth. Korea is highly industrialized. Industry consumes over 50% of all energy, which is quite exceptional for IEA countries. Without new policy, emissions are set to increase further. But Korea set itself a target to reduce emissions from a business as usual case by 33% in 2030. And several policy instruments are already in place. I want to highlight the emissions trading system of Korea, the first of its kind in Northeast Asia since 2015, that sets a best practice example for other countries to follow. Putting a price on carbon is a cost-effective instrument to reduce CO2 emissions. Like many other of such systems, initially Korea granted the emission rights for free. But now that the system is in place and functioning, Korea can gradually reduce the number of free emission rights, and the price of carbon will subsequently increase, giving an incentive to industry and power and heat generators to look for less carbon-intensive solutions. Using less coal will also strongly contribute to reducing local air pollution, which is a well-known problem in the large cities of Korea. And next, I want to highlight the ambition to become carbon neutral by 2050. With this ambition, Korea puts itself in the Champions League of countries that want to mitigate quickly. For Korea, this will be much harder than for other countries that already have a large share of renewables in their energy mix. But these countries show it's doable, and Korea should carefully study their examples. Next, I want to look at the power sector that is very often a starting point to decarbonize. Currently, only 11% of installed capacity in Korea is renewables, and still 2/3 is coal and natural gas. Electricity demand is expected to grow strongly in the coming decades for two reasons: economic growth and electrification of sectors such as industry and transport. The installed capacity is expected to grow by almost 40% to 2030, but all this growth will come from renewables, as the installed capacity of coal, natural gas, and nuclear will remain flat. But renewable will grow from 13 gigawatt to 60 gigawatt, an increase of 450%. Dedicated policies and electricity market reform will be needed to make this happen, not just financial support. The good news is that the cost of wind and solar have come down rapidly, and more cost reductions can be expected. The major challenge is finding a location for these new renewable installations, as Korea has one of the highest population densities in the world. The government should engage in a very strong dialogue with its population to gain support for this. Another point I want to highlight is energy efficiency. Like many other IEA countries, Korea has little domestic fossil fuel resources. Almost all has to be imported at a very high cost. But there is one source that all countries have: energy efficiency. Every unit of energy that is not consumed does not have to be produced. That saves on the import costs, but also on emissions. For most countries, energy efficiency is actually the most cost-efficient way to reduce emissions. Energy efficiency is incremental. It does not require large new installations, so there are no ribbons to be cut. But it can benefit the population in multiple ways, by reducing energy bills and by making homes more comfortable. Under their business as usual conditions, Korea's energy consumption is set to grow by 16% to 2040. But the government has set a target for consumption to remain flat or even slightly decrease, despite the expected economic growth. The IEA suggests that the government should consider an even higher ambition for energy, as more energy efficiency supports all the other energy and climate policy goals of the government. We heard from our executive director about the important role of transport in the future. Now, transport is also the sector that is one of the most difficult to decarbonize in all countries around the world. Several strategies are needed. The shift to public transport, promoting walking and cycling for shorter distances, making vehicles more efficient. And that is an area where Korea can take a lead because it has a highly innovative automobile industry. And of course, the expansion of alternative transport fuels. Korea has ambitious targets to electrify transport or have vehicles run on fuel cells. Korea's fuel cell ambition is unparalleled globally, and it fits very well with the country's ambition for a hydrogen society. But promoting cars, electric vehicles and fuel cell cars is one aspect. But people who buy these cars will also need to be sure that they can find a place to recharge or refill their cars. Therefore, the Korean government has ambitious plans to increase the number of charging stations and refilling stations for hydrogen quickly. Notably, the latter will require very strong engagement with the population to convince them that having a hydro station next by is a positive thing and can be done in a safe manner. I'm now pleased to hand back to our executive director to share the key recommendations and findings of the report.
So these were some of the key findings of our study. And now, if I can summarize some of the recommendations we have and give the floor to Mr. Deputy Minister to hear his response to our recommendations. I would like to start by saying that it was reassuring for IEA team to see how committed the Korean government is to advance its clean energy transitions, especially by having a higher share of renewables, improving energy efficiency, and innovation of different clean energy technologies, but especially hydrogen. Having said that, we would like to make some recommendations. First, we think that the Korean government could elevate the status of Korean Electricity Commission as an independent regulator of the power sector. Korea may well need an independent regulator of power sector. Second, in order to see strong growth in energy efficiency and renewable energy deployment, voluntary efforts are very good, but there may be a need for performance-driven regulatory measures. As I said a few minutes ago, governments are sitting in the driving seat of the car of the transition, and here to give a government impetus, having regulatory frameworks would be helpful to see better results in efficiency and renewables. Third, it is important to give signal to the consumers at home, consumers in the industry, and the signal we can give through prices. And we suggest that the government of Korea may consider to have an energy taxation for all fuels, which reflects their costs, including carbon content, their carbon content, and their causing air pollution. And a fourth key suggestion we have, Korea has strong, clean transportation mobility targets. It is excellent. Technological developments here will be very important, from hydrogen to other options. But here, there is an important need to have the necessary infrastructure ready, and therefore we will recommend to push the infrastructure rollout to support those clean mobility targets that we agree with. And here, Mr. Deputy Minister, I wanted to assure you that the IEA will be ready to support you, your government. Korea is an esteemed, a key member of the IEA family, and we are very happy with your ambitious government plans, and we will be with you in your journey to have a clean energy transition, but at the same time, a resilient energy sector, and hopefully a strong economic growth. This is our report, and I would like to turn to you, Mr. Deputy Minister. I would be very happy to hear your comments about our reports, findings, and recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these presentations by IEA, and I'd like to appreciate your presentations. These presentations include major findings and recommendations. Thank you very much for your effort. We understand that all these policy evaluations and the findings and recommendations provided by IEA will be very useful in further developing energy policies in Korea. In addition, Executive Director Ms. Dr. Biro talked about the impact of COVID-19 on the energy market and what new changes and challenges are emerging in the global energy industry. These will be very important for our decision making as well. Thank you very much for your input. In July this year, in order to recover from the impact of COVID-19 and to accelerate transition to low carbon economic and social structure, the Korean government announced the Green New Deal in July. For the next 5 years, we are planning to invest 73.4 trillion won for eco-friendly and low-carbon areas, and we are going to achieve sustainable and safe energy mix, smart and resilient energy delivery structures, and efficient energy consumption. We announced specific strategies to achieve these. And as Dr. Birol mentioned several times, the Korean government made a very ambitious plan of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. About 8 years ago, IEA announced the second IDR report on Korea, and since then, the Korean government has been working on improving its energy policies. As for the recommendations by IEA, I'd like to make some comments. First of all, these recommendations can be categorized as efforts to improve energy efficiency, greater engagement and participation of various stakeholders, and enhancing market mechanisms. Upon receiving these recommendations, we are going to make these efforts. First of all, we're going to apply ICT solutions at the consumption points so that we can substantially enhance energy efficiency for industries, buildings, and households. We have many technological solutions that we have, and Korea will continue to share these ICT solutions with IEA and the IEA other member countries. Secondly, we are going to involve stakeholders from the stages of policy development, and so that we can manage any potential conflicts in advance. we are planning to increase the share of renewables going forward. And in pushing for renewables, we're going to communicate with the local residents very early on so that they can understand the reasons for these renewable projects and they can have better acceptance. And we're also planning to create local community energy centers in order to facilitate communication with local residents and local governments. Third, there were IEA recommendations about electricity market improvement and the systems improvement. And there were some recommendations about the Korean electricity regulation system. We're going to continue to improve our electricity market going forward. First of all, we're going to improve the electricity market mechanism so that fossil fuels will have disadvantages. And by revamping our market structures, we're going to have some more incentives for renewables, and we're going to have some mechanisms to predict renewables power generation output so that we can manage the system integration more effectively. And we want to continue to work closely with IEA. As Dr. Birol mentioned, Korea has been very much involved in IEA efforts. And in addition to this IDR report, there is the electricity security report that has been working on between IEA and the Korean Energy Economics Institute, and I very much look forward to this report coming out soon. And based on this report to be released soon, I'd like to make one suggestion to Dr. Birol. As you know, the Korean government announced carbon neutrality by 2050, and we want to understand how to improve electricity market systems. And I'd like to propose a joint research project with IEA. I understand that IEA is engaged in many other projects, but if you could provide us with some best practices and good examples of how to improve the electricity market, and by collaborating with the Korean counterparts, we will be able to develop and further enhance our electricity market, which can once again be a role model for other countries. There have been many exchanges between the Korean side and the IEA side, and I'm very happy to see you, even though it's virtual. And I hope that the world will overcome the COVID-19 soon so that we can meet in person either in Seoul or in Paris. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Minister, for your very valuable words, your assessment of our review. Thank you very much for that. And we are really so fortunate to have a government like Korea being a member of the IEA, because you are a very innovative country. And when we look at the past, you have proven times and times again to make sure that the new technologies are becoming the part of the Korean energy mix. Your suggestion is an excellent suggestion. Normally, in the previews, we make the suggestions, but this time, once again, you are very innovative. You make the suggestion to us, but it's a wonderful one. I completely agree. In front of the public here, I can commit myself, commit my agency to work with your government to look at it. How do we need to design the electricity markets in a sector where it goes to 2050 net zero? Because it is not the same thing, it's a different context, and it is the reason that I accept your suggestion with enthusiasm. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Deputy Minister. And with this, I think we will go to the questions, and I will turn to my colleague, Mr. Murat, to organize the Q&A.
Many thanks, Executive Director. We're turning to the Q&A part of the session. In the 10 minutes we have left, we'll take a 2-minute break so we can collect the questions, and we will return to address the questions. Thank you very much.
So you can give the first two things. Yeah. read the name of the agency.
And we're back. Thank you very much. We have been collecting many, many questions from the press. I will read a couple of questions and perhaps address them to Dr. Birol and Mr. Deputy Minister. The first question from Chosun Ilbo. The Korean government announced its ambition for achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 while maintaining nuclear phase out. Can Korea get to net zero in 2050 while phasing out nuclear at the same time? Perhaps the question for you, Dr. Birol. Second question from Yonhap News Agency. Do you think the government's target to increase the share of renewable energy to 20% in the power mix by 2030 is achievable? What systems should be improved or efforts made to achieve this? Perhaps this is a question for both yourself, Dr. Birol, and Mr. Minister. Dr. Birol, please.
Thank you very much. Now, the first question from Chosun Ibo, role of nuclear in reaching climate goals. When we look at globally, nuclear has a significant share in the global electricity mix, having the advantage of being a net zero carbon technology. Globally, it will be difficult to reach 2050 net zero goals. But when it comes to countries, every country has to make its own decisions how they are going to reach their zero emission goals in 2050. Nuclear is not the only zero emission technology. Renewables, efficiency, green hydrogen, others can also help. It is up to the country to see which technologies they are going to use and what are the consequences of their technology choices for emissions, for economy, and for the security of their energy systems. So there is not one recipe for everybody. Every country has to make its own choice here, including Korea. The second question about renewables. Now, I mentioned in my speech, and also my colleague, Mrs. Grachik, also mentioned the critical role of renewables globally and also for Korea. Unfortunately, today, the share of renewables in Korea is very low. It is about 4%. One of the lowest in the IEA family. And it is also significantly lower than the global averages. But I see some good signs coming from Korea on two areas. One, offshore wind, the other one, solar. Especially offshore wind, we expect huge decline in costs around the world. And as a result of that, we expect, like we have seen in the solar, major penetration. But this will not happen by itself. We would like Korean government to push a couple of buttons in order to see stronger penetration of renewables. One of them is, I mentioned a few minutes ago, taxation of the fuels. This is very important. Second, speeding up of licensing processes of renewable projects. Third, having a good contact, dialogue with local communities. And fourth, further support for research and development activities to bring the cost of renewables down. So these are some suggestions in order to reach from 4% today to the 20% that we have as a target in 2050. 2030. Maybe Mr. Deputy Minister would like to add as well.
네,
Yes, we have the renewable energy 3020 target, and I'd like to discuss whether this is an achievable target. As Dr. Birol mentioned, currently, Korea has to work harder to increase the share of renewables in the energy mix because our share of renewables is lower than IEA members or the global average. But for the past 3 years, renewables energy capacity has been increasing, and the rate of increase has been higher than expected. Of course, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, investment has been affected, but renewables related investments have been increasing in Korea. And the Korean government will continue to reflect the IEA recommendations because these are very much in line with our government policies, including promoting R&D on new technology for wind and PV. And we are also putting in place various measures to increase public acceptance. And as for offshore wind projects, the government is now driving this entire process to carry out large-size offshore wind projects. And we will continue to plan for various measures. And as Dr. Birol mentioned, the cost of offshore wind and PV is declining. So they will become very price competitive. So we have a lot of hopes for that. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Many thanks. We have another question for you, Mr. Minister. Could you comment? This is a question from Christopher Hobson from Recharge News. Could you comment on the role and targets you see for hydrogen growth in South Korea, please?
네, 한국은 작년 1월
In January of last year, Korea announced its roadmap for hydrogen economy, and since then in transportation, power generation, and in new fields such as drones, hydrogen is being used in various different fields. And with regards to our hydrogen vehicles penetration, as of this year, we have about 9,500 units that have been sold. So globally, that will be about 40% of the global hydrogen car penetration. And so we are exerting that effort as well. As well, hydrogen is more, we are trying to make hydrogen more eco-friendly. So we have R&D and international collaboration that we are strengthening to reach this goal. And another effort of the government is that we are trying to secure broad governmental support for hydrogen development. And for the first time in the world, we have a hydrogen support special act that we have enacted to speed up the process. And with many different countries, we are willing to cooperate on hydrogen, developing hydrogen technology. And in our cooperation with IEA also, we hope to engage in a lot of hydrogen projects in the future. For us to reach carbon neutrality, hydrogen, we feel, will be providing us with solutions in many different areas. And so rather than short-term goals, we are trying to set mid to long-term goals so that with all of the stakeholders involved, we are collaborating to ensure that we have hydrogen transition happening successfully. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We still have many questions from journalists, but in the interest of time, I will take one more question and address this to Dr. Birol from Alex Forbes. Korea is currently the third largest importer of liquefied natural gas. How do you expect LNG use to develop 2030 and beyond? Thank you.
So, thank you. But I should mention that, Mr. Deputy Minister, there is so much press interest on Korean energy issues. I think you must have a very busy agenda over there in Seoul. Now, coming to the LNG question, the first of all, what we see today, there is a lot of surplus production. And 2019 was the year where we saw the biggest number of new FIDs made for LNG, which would mean, especially in an environment when the demand of gas is rather on the low side, LNG prices should be at a reasonable level. And in this context, Korean governments, one of the decisions that we have not discussed in depth today, but a very important one, phase out of coal, because coal is the most polluting fuels of all the fossil fuels we are talking today. So I believe, at least in the short and medium term, Korea will continue to make use of LNG to meet its gas demand, but also replace coal, at least partly from LNG, and as such continue to be an important LNG importer in the next years to come.
Many thanks, Dr. Birol. And this, thank you. This concludes the Q&A part of the presentation. I will turn it back to you, Dr. Birol, to close the session. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy Minister, dear colleagues in Seoul, thank you very much for all the support you have given throughout this process of reviewing the Korean energy policies. I would like to thank you for being very open to our recommendations, critiques, suggestions. I took note of your suggestion, Mr. Deputy Minister, to work on the energy systems on the way to 2050 net zero. We will get in touch with your colleagues on that. I am going to task our division head, Mr. Art von Boheman, to be a contact person for that. And I'm very much looking forward to come to Seoul very soon. Mr. Deputy Minister, I missed Seoul very much. Your hospitality, your friendship, and if I may, your food over there. And looking forward to be with you there in Seoul. And also, will be a great privilege to host you here in Paris, in our headquarters sometime soon, Mr. Deputy Minister. Thank you very much for being a reliable partner of the International Energy Agency.